Nothing Norman Finkelstein says should be taken seriously, but unfortunately has been given a massive audience recently for him to spread his hysterical and anti-Israel nonsense. And so we thought it would be useful to expose him. The truth is, he's a giant liar. Let's just take a look at this interview he did with Russell Brand. Lie number one.
What happened on October 7th wasn't the beginning of the story. It was really the climax of a chapter in the story. And that's climax in the chapter of the story begins really in 2006 when Israel imposed a brutal economic blockade on Gaza.
Finkelstein makes it sound like everything was fine. Gaza was just a nice little community minding its own business until big mean Israel woke up one day and decided to blockade it. This is a total lie. Gaza was ruled by the Ottomans, and then ruled by the British, and then ruled by the Egyptians, and then came under the control of Israel. But unlike the Ottomans, the British, and the Egyptians, Israel withdrew from Gaza and gave the Palestinians full independence.
The soldiers that you have seen are the last ones to leave the Gaza Strip. From this moment on, the responsibility for all that takes place in Gaza Strip lays on the Palestinians.
Not only did Israel withdraw its armed forces from Gaza, Israel used its very armed forces to remove Jews living in that area. Remember Gush Katif? For a short time, Gaza was totally free. No so-called occupations, no blockade, but then Hamas, an organization which already at the time had the blood of hundreds of innocent Jews on their hands, an organization founded with the aim of killing all Jews and destroying the Jewish state, an organization recognized as a terrorist organization by most Western countries, won Palestinian elections in Gaza in 2006. The Quartet on the Middle East, a group made up of the United States, Russia, the UN, and the European Union, then issued a statement threatening to cut aid to Gaza if its new government, Hamas, didn't make a basic commitment that one day, eventually, they would renounce terrorism and accept Israel. Hamas totally rejected these conditions. They vowed to keep killing Jews and fighting to destroy Israel. Hamas then launched a war on their fellow Palestinians. They wanted total control of Gaza, and so they had their terrorists attack Fatah, the other major Palestinian party, killing whoever stood in their way, including throwing Fatah members off of the top of Gaza's tallest buildings.
بننسى تقطيع الأرجل إحنا، بننسى إلقاء الناس من فوق المنازل، بننسى تخزين المواد المتفجرة تحت الأحياء السكنية والأسواق المكتظة وما بتشوفي إلا
صحيح، والاعتداء على النساء،
والاعتداء على النساء، الاعتداء على المناضلين.
After a few days of civil war, Hamas was in total control. Israel was then faced by a radical government right on its border run by literal terrorists. Israel had only two realistic options: invade Gaza and destroy Hamas, or try to avoid war by containing Hamas and prevent them from getting major weapons. Israel chose the second option, an option much more generous to the Palestinians, and so the blockade began.
What you saw on October 7th was young men who had been born into a concentration camp and had lived for 20 years of their lives in that concentration camp.
Israel haters like Finkelstein love to call Gaza a concentration camp because of Israel's pre-October 7th blockade. This is another attempt by Finkelstein to mislead his audience by fudging the truth. Make no mistake, to compare Gaza to a concentration camp is a form of Holocaust denial. To minimize the suffering of the victims of the Holocaust by comparing their experience to Palestinians in Gaza is truly disgusting. Gaza is a self-governing entity. Resorts, restaurants, amusement parks. That didn't exist in Auschwitz and Birkenau. This is a ridiculous thing to say. There are no prison barracks, no gas chambers, there's no roll call, no forced labor, no prison lineups. It is simply an area under blockade, not a concentration camp. Those are two completely different things. But more importantly, the Jews during the Holocaust never tried to murder all the Germans or destroy Germany like Hamas is trying to do to Israel. The Holocaust was a genocide. The blockades of Gaza, however, was a defensive action taken to prevent genocide in the most humane manner possible. And unlike in the Holocaust, the people of Gaza have the option of simply renouncing terrorism. The blockade would have been lifted.
Israel periodically, to quote Israel, mows the lawn in Gaza. And what is mowing the lawn? Well, mowing the lawn is these high-tech massacres that Israel launches against Gaza.
Finkelstein then launches into a rant about one of those ghost stories Israel haters like to tell each other, the myth of the so-called mowing of the lawn. Again, Finkelstein is deliberately lying to his audience, falsely claiming that Israel periodically invades Gaza for no other reason other than to mow the lawn, meaning killing Gazan civilians. This is all fantasy. Mowing the lawn is just an expression used occasionally by Israelis in reference to retaliating against Hamas when they commit acts of terror. Under Israel's failed strategy of trying to contain Hamas, in a wishful attempt to avoid total war, Israel occasionally was forced to launch limited retaliatory operations against Hamas. For example, in 2014, after Hamas terrorists kidnapped and murdered 3 Israeli teenage boys and launched rockets at Israeli towns, Israel responded with Operation Protective Edge to stop the rocket fire, weaken Hamas's terror capabilities, and restore peace in the area. In every case, Israel took extraordinary measures to avoid killing civilians when possible, and eventually signed ceasefire agreements and withdrew all the troops, leaving Gaza all to themselves. The restraint shown by Israel throughout the years is truly mind-blowing. If any other country on earth faced what Israel faced, constant rocket fire in civilians, population, and acts of terror, they'd utterly annihilate whoever or whatever was doing it. But Israel showed nearly infinite patience and restraint, limiting themselves to just mowing the lawn when their people were terrorized. On October 7th, Hamas finally crossed the line, and Israelis are out of patience.
You have in front of you a list taken from not a human rights report, not from the United Nations, but just random testimonies of Israeli soldiers who fought in Operation Protective Edge.
I remember that the level of destruction looked insane to me. Source 22 soldier. We entered Gaza with an insane amount of firepower. 25 soldier. It all looked like a science fiction movie. Serious levels of destruction everywhere. Everything was really in ruins and non-stop fire all the time. 30 soldier. Before the entrance on foot to the Gaza Strip, a crazy amount of artillery was fired at the entire area. Before a tank makes any movement, it fires every time. Those guys were trigger happy. Totally crazy. 31 soldier. The explosions effects caused major amounts of damage, but that doesn't interest anyone. Use it. Explosives can't be taken back, the platoon commander says. I don't want to leave explosives with me. 36 soldier. Our view was of the center of the strip. Let's say it was a real fireworks display. From a distance, it looked pretty cool. If you looked through a night vision scope, you saw crazy wreckage. It was a real trip. 38 soldier. You're shooting at anything that moves and also at what isn't moving. Crazy amounts. It also becomes a bit like a computer game. Totally cool and real. 49 soldier. It was total destruction in there. The photos online are child's play compared to what we saw there in reality. I never saw anything like it. 70 soldier. The unfathomable number of dead on one of the sides. The unimaginable levels of destruction. The way militant cells and people were regarded as targets and not as living beings. That's something that troubles me. 74 soldier. It's destruction on a whole other level. 94 soldier. The Air Force carries out an insane amount of strikes in the Gaza Strip during an operation like Protective Edge. 96 soldier. Shells are being fired all the time. Even if we aren't actually going to enter. Shells. What happens for 7 days straight? It's non-stop bombardment. That's what happens in practice. These are accounts taken from Gaza, read by me.
Of all the lies we cover here, this one is the laziest. Finkelstein tries to prove that the ghost story of Israel mowing of the lawn is true, and that Israel periodically massacres Gazan civilians by having Russell Brand read from Finkelstein's book, where Finkelstein has quotes from Israeli soldiers talking about the 2014 Israel-Gaza war. But I believe the audience was surprised when Brand actually read the quotes, since not one of them mentions anything deliberately about killing civilians. All they say is that war is intense and Israel used a lot of firepower. Does Finkelstein not know that war is intense? Did he think that wars are fought with baseball bats? Not only that, Finkelstein gives zero context for these quotes. This is very important. Finkelstein doesn't say whether Israel warns civilians first to leave from the areas where the battles these soldiers are describing take place. That's what Israel usually does. But Finkelstein leaves that out because he doesn't actually care about the truth. He has his agenda, and he is not afraid to mislead the audience to spread his message.
Where does human shielding even come into play here? It's not as if the combatants are saying we were trying to target combatants, but they were being shielded by civilians. That's not what the testimony says. If it did say it, I would have put it in the book, because I am not afraid of truth. If that's what's said, I would have put it in the book and then attempted to explain it. but that's not what's being said. When you get away from the propaganda and the propagandists, the propaganda of the state of Israel and the propagandists like Mark Regev and Ben Shapiro.
Here, Norman Finkelstein tries to weasel his way out of the fact that Hamas uses human shields. While talking about the 2014 Gaza-Israel war, Finkelstein claims that there are no statements from Israeli soldiers describing the use of human shields. None. And that proves Hamas does not use human shields ever. Then he rants about how if there was such testimony, he would have put it in his book, along with the statements he made Russell Brand read earlier. He rants about how committed he is to the truth, and he calls Ben Shapiro a propagandist. Finkelstein is flat out lying to you. There's a lot of testimony by the IDF soldiers regarding the use of human shields during the 2014 war. For example, listen to this from IDF Lieutenant Adam Landau.
התפיסה של החמאס מאוד מבוססת על להיטמע שם באוכלוסייה ולהילחם מתוך שטח אזרחי, ואנחנו ראינו את זה. ירו עלינו מספר מסגדים, בתי ספר, שלא מדבר כמובן על בתים פרטיים. יש שם בית של, אתה יודע, משפחה, ואתה רואה עדיין את הבגדים תלויים בחוץ, מנפנפים כל מיני שמלות של ילדים, אתה יודע, ילדות. ומאחורה מסתתר לך מחבל עם קלצ'ניקוב ויורה עליך. אתה רואה את הניצול הזה גם של החמאס, של ילדים. אני יכול, אירוע אחד שהיה לנו בגדוד, שגם מחבל שהתחילו להיסגר עליו והבינו שנמצא בבית מסוים. באיזשהו שלב שם ילד קטן, החזיק אותו צמוד אליו וברח. כל מחבל עכשיו שמחליט שהוא נכנס למקום אזרחי, זה לא נותן לו חסינות. מצד שני, אנחנו שוקלים מאוד מאוד טוב, כי אף אחד לא רוצה, אתה יודע, לפגוע בבלתי מעורבים, ובמיוחד לא שמדובר בילדים, נשים.
Another soldier described how a man about 40 years old walked out of a house nearby. Then I saw that he was holding a woman, that he was using her as a shield. That was the first time I saw with my own eyes someone using another person, a woman, as a shield. I'd seen videos at home, I'd heard about it on the news, and I'd believed it, but now I was seeing it with my own eyes. And I can see very clearly that that woman does not want to be there, and he's pulling her with him. Only after he finally let go of the woman could we neutralize him.
That mowing of the lawn means 2.3 million people, half of whom are children. You understand? Mowing the skull of a child. That's not being emotive. That's not being histrionic. That's not being theatrical. That's being factual. Mowing the skulls of 1.1 million children.
This is just a total lie. Nothing about this bizarre statement is remotely true. There is not a shred of evidence Israel is mowing the skulls of children. This is a total blood libel and just more evidence of how sick this man is.
Who provokes these periodic mowings of the lawn? Let's take one case, which is the best documented. In June 2008, Hamas and Israel reached a ceasefire. The ceasefire held up until November 4th, 2008. Israel at that moment elected to break the ceasefire and go in and launch what was called back then Operation Cast Lead. That lasted from December 26th to January 17th. There is no dispute whatsoever. Even Israeli publications, official Israeli publications, acknowledge the ceasefire held until November 4th, when Israel broke the ceasefire, and what eventually ensued on December 26th was Operation Cast Lead.
Finkelstein tries to use the example of the 2008 Israel-Gaza war to make the insane claim that Hamas doesn't provoke wars. But as you can probably guess, Finkelstein totally misrepresents the facts. Here's what really happened. After signing a ceasefire agreement with Israel, Hamas tried to dig a tunnel into Israel to use to kidnap and kill Israelis. Left with no choice, Israel launched an operation to destroy the tunnel, and Hamas responded by launching a war. While lawyers can debate whether Hamas digging the terror tunnel was technically speaking a violation of the agreement it signed with Israel, it is insane for any normal person to believe that Israel was wrong to protect its people and its borders.
So it's not true that Hamas breaks the ceasefires.
Finkelstein claims that Hamas doesn't violate ceasefires. Here's a list of times that Hamas broke ceasefires just in the course of the 2014 war. 15th of July, Israel accepted the ceasefire initiated by Egypt and stopped all fire at 9 o'clock. However, terrorists fired more than 50 rockets at Israeli communities. Only after 6 hours of continuous rocket attacks did the IDF respond. The 20th of July, Israel approved a 2-hour medical humanitarian window in the area of Sejaiya, following an International Committee of the Red Cross request. 40 minutes after the ceasefire began, Hamas violated it. Nevertheless, Israel implemented the ceasefire, even extending it for 2 more hours. 26th of July, Hamas announced a 24-hour humanitarian ceasefire at 14 o'clock. Hamas violated its own ceasefire a short time later. Despite Hamas's continuous fire, Israel decided to extend the humanitarian ceasefire for a second time from midnight Saturday until midnight Sunday. I can go on and on and on.
Prime Minister Netanyahu said, you have to treat the people of Gaza like Amalek, referring to the Hebrew Bible, wipe out every man, woman, child, and animal, every camel, every fox. So that was the opportunity that Israel seized upon.
This is just another outright lie. Netanyahu never said we should treat the people of Gaza like Amalek. This is just another line used by Israel haters to fool their biblically ignorant followers. Here's what Netanyahu actually said.
You must remember what Amalek has done to you, says our Holy Bible, and we do remember and we are fighting.
The Torah tells us to forever remember what Amalek did to us Jews when they attacked us in the desert after we left slavery in Egypt. And so it was a mitzvah. It was a positive commandment for all the Jews to remember what Amalek did. In fact, we finish our daily prayers by reminding ourselves of Amalek, the commandment to remember them. It is important to remember that never forget what Hamas did to us on October 7th. And that's why Netanyahu invoked the biblical phrase, remember what Amalek did to you, to refer to Hamas' terrorist attack. That's it. This whole conspiracy theory is completely ridiculous. If Israel was attempting a genocide and Netanyahu is treating Gaza like God says in the Bible to treat Amalek, then Israel wouldn't be telling Gazan civilians exactly where they will attack and when they will attack so they have time to leave. Israel wouldn't be dropping leaflets before hitting a particular area warning civilians to evacuate. Israel wouldn't be sending food and humanitarian aid into Gaza. Finkelstein is relying on his audience being uninformed to spread his lies. Don't fall for it.
Hamas has repeatedly made offers to Israel, either for what's called a Hudna, Hudna, which just means a long-term ceasefire between Israel and the Palestinians, a ceasefire along the a truce, along the roughly about 20 to 30-year truce. They've made that offer, and they've also made offers to establish a Palestinian state along the lines of the international consensus, meaning the June 1967 border, Israel within its legal borders, and a Palestinian state within the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. All those peace offerings by Hamas were completely rejected by Israel and backed by the United States. So it's not true. The factual record is very clear on that. It's not true that Hamas was unwilling to reach a reasonable settlement of the conflict.
Hamas never offered to recognize Israel or to stop trying to murder Jews and destroy Israel. Hamas just offered to take everything Israel had previously offered Palestinians and give basically nothing in return. For example, Hamas's 2004 offer was to declare a 10-year truce if Israel gave Hamas the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza. Essentially, Hamas promised that if Israel stops fighting them and gives them half of Israel, Hamas would wait 10 years before trying to conquer the rest of Israel and kill the Jews. This is clearly an effort to gain Hamas time to get stronger before trying to finish Israel once and for all. Imagine a peace deal like that. Well, we're not going to try to kill you for 10 years. Hamas's leadership literally said they wanted the deal because it's difficult to liberate our land at this stage. So we accept a phased liberation. Just to be clear, by liberation, they mean the destruction of Israel. Nothing Hamas says can be trusted. After October 7th, a Hamas leader bragged on TV how we made them think Hamas was busy with governing Gaza. Ha ha ha, right?
وحماس سلوكها في السنتين الماضيات انه عقلاني وما بتدخل في حروب وما وقفت مع الجهاد الاسلامي في معركته السابقه.
لكن هي كانت ضمن استراتيجيه
طبعا انه حماس مشغوله بالحكومه في غزه وبدها تدير بالها على 1.5 مليون فلسطيني وملتهيه وخلص تركت المقاومه، لكن حماس من تحت الطاوله كانت تحضر لهذه العمليه الكبيره.
In other words, Hamas pretended to want peace, in order to plan the biggest massacre of Jews in a single day since the Holocaust. Make sure you know the facts.